Hello and welcome to the North Texas Teen Book Festival's new virtual author panel series. I'm Rebecca Marsick and will be moderating this panel of amazing authors. Since we're not able to meet in person these days, NTTBF wanted to make sure to feed your love of reading and hearing from incredible authors wherever you are, from the comfort of your own internet connection. So thank you for joining us today for the Rick Riordan Presents panel. Today's panel features J.C. Cervantes, Kwame Mbalia, and unfortunately, Tehlor Kay Mejia cannot join us today due to the wildfires in California. If you would like to know more about what's happening with her, she's been posting on her social media, and we are going to be putting a link to a GoFundMe for her in the chat for everyone. However, I am so excited to learn alongside these two authors as we talk about all things mythology, imagination, and inspiration. After you watch the panel, please fill out our survey about the program because it will help us evaluate and plan future events. And also make sure that you follow at NTTBF Fest and at Irving Library on social media for information about future events. In order to start our panel, I'm going to ask our two authors to give a quick bumper sticker summary of their book. I'm going to actually start with Tehlor's book, Paula, Santiago, and the River of Tears. 12-year-old Paula Santiago overcomes evil with science and the power of love in this adventure fantasy based on the Mexican legend of La Llorona, the crying woman. Kwame, you want to start us off?
Sure. So Tristan Strong, the Tristan Strong series, Tristan Strong punches a hole in the sky and Tristan Strong destroys the world, are my books about an African-American boy who discovers that there is a world where African-American folktales and West African gods and other African mythologies exist, but they exist in conflict, and he has to help them bridge that conflict to save their world and his from a greater evil.
JC.
I'm the author of the Stormrunner series. It's a trilogy, and the Shadow Crosser just came out. And that book centers around a Mexican boy, Zayn Obispo, who finds himself in the middle of a summer thinking that he is going to spend time training his new God-born skills at Shai-Ham, when in fact he finds out that the gods, all the Maya gods, have gone missing. And he has to go on probably his most dangerous epic journey ever, with friends and monsters, and to determine what has happened to the gods. And it's a really fun adventure across time and space.
Awesome, thank you. So I wanted to just start with thinking about how your characters are traveling to these other worlds that you've created. And I'm wondering, like, what's your world building process? So how do you create a world with creatures that don't exist that we know of? In our own, and how much mythology do you incorporate versus how much is from your own imagination?
So I'll tackle that first. I think for me, so I was raised on many of these tales and stories. And what was interesting to me is when I was doing the research for the books, I found so many different accounts and there really wasn't any cohesive narrative. And because we're talking about an ancient civilization that was colonized by the Spanish in the late 1500s, many, many, many records were destroyed. And so putting together those histories and those stories has proven very, very challenging over the years. And so I did have to incorporate kind of my own imagination in developing certain mythologies, even though I had a base to utilize. That's a very strong, incredible, imaginative base. And so for me, I kind of utilized what I already had, what we already know about the Maya pantheon. And so, for example, the ancient Maya were really sophisticated timekeepers. And yet I couldn't find anything in the pantheon that was related to a god or goddess of time. And so I thought, gosh, wouldn't it be interesting to create that god or goddess of time? And so I kind of just based on what I already had, it was building off of that.
Great.
Yeah, for me, everything that I write is inspired. It's inspired by our world, whether it's geographical features, whether it's iconography and symbols. Usually I'm reading something, or I'm browsing and perusing Pinterest and pinning ideas and stuff for my world building. And this secondary world that Tristan travels to, the world of Alki. It's my homage to fantasy inspired by Africa instead of what has been considered traditional Western fantasy worlds. And so we have grasslands with giant lake systems, as we find in book 2. We have Isilangu, which is the giant, huge shield mountain fortress that is inspired by the Drakensberg Mountains that runs across South Africa. And then we have the Golden Crescent, which is inspired by what was called the Gold Coast of Africa, Western Africa, of Ghana, Togo, Benin, and using that inspiration, trying to pull. There are people, just normal people, just like you and I are in Tristan's world, that are living in these places, but there are also story creatures, talking animals that you would find in a lot of folk tales. And so it's really about trying to find, for my world building, what the hardest part for my world building was trying to find a food that everyone would eat, because, you got Burr Fox, carnivore, then you have Burr Rabbit, who is obviously a rabbit. And then you have people and turtles and tortoises and birds. And it's like, okay, what do they eat that, I could put in there that wouldn't completely break everything? And finally, I just had to settle on like soup. Soup is a universal staple in this world. Everyone loves it. Soup. That is the only meal I put in this book, is soup.
That's so interesting. I never would have even thought about like, what is the universal food, but that's fascinating. So I'm thinking about how, in terms of like creating these worlds and how much mythology and its connection to your own roots, like what was something that you were like obsessed with or really interested in when you were a kid? So like, I think about how I went through this phase where I was obsessed with knowing everything about the Titanic. And it came from my dad. He had this real interest in it. And so like, I just had to read everything about it. I watched everything. And this was like before it was even found at the bottom of the ocean. So that was really exciting for me. I'm wondering like, what was something that you were really, really into as a kid?
I'll start this one off, and I will say that, have you ever played that game where it's like, you ask each other, like, what is your highly specific superpower? Like, what is your mundane superpower? Something that you could perform and replicate accurately on end, like whether it's, knowing the correct spoonful of jelly that will completely cover a piece of toast every time, no matter what, you can nail it. And for me, growing up, a lot of it was like creating and finding our own superpowers. I was fascinated with X-Men and Superman, and finding all of these, like, what would be my hidden power. Like, I remember when I was, I was really young, maybe 4 or 5 or something, and I bumped my elbow, and you hit your funny bone and everything starts tingling, and I was like, I've unlocked my power. Like, that's what that is. I am going to become a superhero. Because I was really invested in the idea of just, the normal people having powers, someone who looked like me having powers, and, what would I do with it? What stories could I create? And so it's not a surprise that for me, that writing a book with, the Tristan Strong series, where his superpower is abnormal, and that is he can, bring stories to life and manipulate them. It's something that past me would have, loved to have controlled if I had that power.
Yeah, I think that mine is kind of similar. So I was obviously obsessed with superheroes and superpowers as well. And also this idea of magic. So, magic was such an everyday and still is part of my culture and how we look at the world and look at life. And so for me, I can remember thinking, okay, it's going to be, and I would make these stories up in my head. I'd say, okay, it's going to be the first full moon of my 13th year if I go out to the beach. Like, I would create this whole narrative. Like, if all these things fell into sequence, then that's when my power was going to come into being, because I absolutely believed that 100%, like without a doubt, that I had magical abilities. And it was just a matter of finding out, how do I unlock them? And it's a sequence of events. It was always a sequence of events in my mind that could be I mean, it's infinite, right? I mean, it could be any sequence of events. And so I felt like that was the mystery of my life was, okay, I've got to figure out how to unlock this magic, whatever that magic was going to be. Mostly I wanted to move things with my mind, but yeah.
I went through a phase of that. I tried really hard.
Like turn off your light while you're already in bed.
Yes, that, and I wanted to do the bewitched thing where I could like transport myself.
Right.
So I'm wondering, did either of you write stories about when you were younger about these unlocking these powers for yourself? Like, are there hidden manuscripts on loose leaf paper and pen in your drawers?
I can think of two occurrences. One, I created a superhero by the name of Emok, which is my name spelled backwards. And I was like, this incredibly powerful superhero. And, as a child, I'm starting to list every single power that he could possibly have. And it's everything because he's the most powerful superhero in the world, because I didn't understand, obstacles and character arcs at that time. He started off the story incredibly overpowered. I don't know where that story is. I think it was for an assignment. Maybe the teacher, took it and was like, you know what, you need to chill out for a little bit. But then the other one is that I would just randomly make up and invent superhero costumes, and then I would wear them to school. And so one time, I don't know what the paper is called, but it's like this very sticky, almost like used for laminating. And so I cut a mask out of it and, wore an old towel as a cape, and I was Toxic Man. I had fell into a chemical spill and I came out and I could detect toxins, in the food and in the air, which would probably be really useful these days. But what I didn't realize is that I would eventually have to take off the mask. And it was, I did. And I think like my eyebrows haven't been the same since because just, one firm rip. It was my first waxing, the last one I'll ever do. That was the beginning and the end of Toxic Man.
So I actually, I used to write in my journal a lot. I was a really, avid reader. But for me, stories were what I created in the real world. So they were acted out. So I was that kid in the neighborhood that would collect, I was the biggest troublemaker, because what I would do is I'd collect all the kids and then I'd give them all their roles and assignments. And then I remember one time in particular, I said, okay, we're going to run away tonight. Like we're going to leave. We're going to be, this brave, courageous group. Everyone had their role. We went out and I can remember we had, I grew up in California and there's all these eucalyptus trees. And so the eucalyptus leaves look kind of like fish. And so we would, I had plucked a bunch of those and we'd put them on sticks and we'd pretend that we were roasting them over a fire. And I actually think I brought some matches, and it was very problematic. And so I ended up getting in a lot of trouble because once our parents found us and we went home, it was, everybody pointed to me. And of course I was kind of the leader of that pack. And so that was a problem. But so it's interesting because when I look back, it's always been lived story more than written story. And I think part of that is just because I come from an oral tradition.
Right.
So did you actually, so you actually made it outside and made it to a spot where you had actually, left the house?
Oh yeah, we would sneak out the windows. We would pack our beds. Like we would spend hours packing our beds to make it look like we were there. I would sneak out the window. My parents were just like, stop sneaking out your window. And I would sneak out the window and then we'd all meet up, under the street light. And then I remember one time, oh my God, I was horrible. We went to this park and we were out all night until dawn. Like our parents did, and we weren't doing anything wrong. I was like 11 years old, but we would just walk the neighborhood. And when a car would come by, we're like, there comes the villain. And we would like jump under another car, or we would hide behind a wall, or, I was just, my poor parents, I don't even know how they like survived me, really.
Kudos to you, because I always was like, now, mine wasn't for any nefarious reason. I just, I read the book Hatchet by Gary Bolton. No, I'm sorry. My Side of the Mountain. I read My Side of the Mountain, with the boy who has he trains a pet peregrine falcon, and, he lives on a mountain by himself eating out of, tortoise shells. And I was like, that's going to be me. And I would pack my bags. I would steal my sister's like plastic jump rope that I could use, you know, as a rope or whatever. And I would never wake up in time. And so it was always like, tonight's the night. And then, you know, I would always fall asleep. So I'm very happy that someone made it out the house, you know, successfully.
Did you ever do anything that you think is dangerous? Like when you look back now?
Yes, but I am not admitting it on camera.
Well, I remember, and I tell my parents all the time, like, because I'm such a helicopter mom. And I remember we would go to the beach and my parents would say, okay, you know, see you later when the sun's setting. And I remember it was so important to me that I had to swim past the waves. Like if I wanted to meet the monsters or I wanted to meet the magic, we had to get past the waves. And so we'd go out there and we would chant, like we would make up this language and we would chant and we would try and call the rain and we would try and, you know, change the wave, you know, the height of the wave because we wanted to body surf. And I just think about these things and there's no way I would leave my kids on the beach and say, yeah, swim past the wave. And then, you know, by the time we would come to shore, we're 3 miles down because of the tide. And oh God, I don't even know, like really, I love listening to people's stories of, you know, how they survived childhood because, and it was a different time, clearly, but I'm lucky I'm still here.
But I feel like that was your initial like world building character developing, right? Like the cars are the evil villains and, you know, the jump rope is going to help you catch the peregrine falcon. It's just, that's the imagination piece. And yeah, when you're just allowed to like run free and sort of, you're not in front of a TV or an Xbox, like I say to my kids all the time. Okay, so we have a question that has come in from YouTube for you, JC. Mary is wondering, what was your favorite part of creating the characters and which character would you say has the most of you in them?
Oh, those are hard, aren't they, Kwame? Those questions are so hard. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this to make sure I have it right. So which character has the most of me and which was the hardest?
Which was your favorite part of creating the characters and which has the most of you in them?
So I think my favorite is always creating the villain. And it's interesting because the villain was always the center of my stories growing up. And the villain had the best backstory. Like they had a reason that they were the villain. They just weren't, oh, I'm just a bad guy because I'm a bad guy. So I loved creating Apush and Camazotz and Shkeek and, you know, and kind of creating their worlds and their backstory. Like, why are they the way they are? I didn't want them just to be, you know, these power hungry gods. So that was probably my favorite. I just loved being in those scenes. Gosh, the character that's most like me, you know, I can't answer that because I think that there's a piece of me in all of the characters. I can tell you the character that I wish that I was the most like, and I've said this before, and that's Ishtab, who is the goddess. In Maya mythology, she is the goddess who would carry the souls to the underworld, and I wanted to give her a much bigger role. And so she actually overthrows the patriarchy, kicks everybody out of Xibalba, the underworld, and she takes over, and she's completely redecorating and making it a brand new place. And there's something about her that she's very appealing to me because she's very powerful. She says what she means and she means what she says. She's not worried about being nice. She doesn't have a lot of, I think, I don't know, some of the baggage that, you know, we going through the world as humans carry. And so I want to be like Ishtab. Not that I'm throwing over the patriarchy, but I want to be like her. Although maybe that would be a good thing.
Thank you. So Kwame, we had a question earlier from Sahil, wants to know, will Tristan Strong have any spin-offs?
Will Tristan Strong have any spin-offs? I can say that there is nothing in the works right now. But the way that I like to write stories is I like to leave, you know, I like to leave certain open ending arcs, you know, of subplots or whatever that could be picked up and spin off on. Just because I find that I create a lot of side characters that I really want to invest more time in and develop them further, see how they became who they were, as JC was saying. Because a lot of times, for me, when I'm creating side characters, I'm creating characters that are, at the beginning, they are obstacles for Tristan, and then eventually they are allies, or, they are temporary antagonists, someone for Tristan to overcome as he proceeds on his way through the quest. But some of those temporary antagonists and some of those, temporary allies are really, really intriguing and interesting. And I would love to be able to explore them further in different stories. Like I'm trying to think I can't say anyone from book 2 as much as I want to, because there's one there that I would really love to talk about, but I can't because it would be a spoiler. But in book 1, I would really like to explore like that time before Tristan arrives in Alki, and there's just this, you have these I call them everyday heroes. These people, the iron monsters are roaming around, they're terrorizing, and you have these people who don't have any magical powers, but they're standing up to them, they're rounding them up. They're, for example, Ayana is ferrying people back and forth to the hideout at the thicket. What's her story before Tristan comes? How many perilous adventures did she go on? How many adventures did Gumbaby go on? Like, what did Gumbaby do before she was sent on the mission to steal Eddie's journal from Tristan? So there are no spinoffs planned right now, but I'm always open to exploring them further, whether they're in short story form or whether they're in just full novelizations.
I feel like Gumbaby could have a great picture book. I do. I don't know. There's something like the visual of Gumbaby to me was in my head all the time as I was reading. And so I don't know. I feel like,
I don't know if she has the appropriate language for a picture book.
I mean, there are all sorts of picture books. Okay, so we have another question from Sky that came a couple days ago for both of you. What is a message you try to send when you write your books?
Well, I will say that I don't sit down with a message in my mind. I sit down to write a great tale. I mean, that's always what I want to do, is I want to get the story on the page. And then what transpires organically and naturally, that's another tale, right? So for me, I can tell you what I think some of the messages are, but I think so often that's really up to the reader to determine. I try not to be didactic with my writing. I hope it doesn't come across as didactic, but I just want to tell a really, really good story.
For me, I think similarly, I don't sit down as like, all right, here's the message that I want to come across. I do sit down with themes, to try and work around themes. Like, okay, in this book, we're going to deal with grief. And so let's talk about the different ways that grief might show up or present itself so that it can be recognized. Or trauma, let's figure out how we, different people, individuals, communities, cities, the world can react to different instances of trauma. So I'll sit down with themes, and then, the messages, they arrive when they arrive. Sometimes, I'll see that and be like, okay, that's really good. Sometimes I'll be like, you know what, that's a little bit on the nose, that's too, we're hammering the reader over their head. We want them to arrive at their conclusions kind of organically, as you were saying, JC. So, but the other thing is that the overall message is I want to make reading fun. Like, I want you to forget you're reading, and I think we've all had that experience where we have a book and, we sit down to read it, and then we look up and it's like 3 a.m. and you're like, where did the time go? I want, my book is almost 500 pages, it's over 100,000 words. And I want you to be able to not be intimidated by hefty tomes like that. I want you to be, that's a challenge. It's like, all right, what am I going to find fun in this book? What am I going to read today that's going to engage me? So I think the message that all writers try to, especially when we're writing for younger readers, we all want to impart the message that this book is fun. Reading is fun. And you may not have found the right book for you yet, but give this one a try and maybe it'll hook you.
So on Facebook, Jenny, I think, is thinking back to your stories about childhood, and she wants to know, as a kid, did you know you wanted to be writers, for both of you? So as you were creating these stories, did you know one day you wanted to be a writer?
No, I had no idea. And it's funny because, isn't everything 2020, when you look back? And for me, I was always a storyteller. My mom told me that I was reading at 4. And the minute that I was reading, and I can remember I would go to bed at night and I would listen to music and I would craft all these stories in my head that for some reason, I don't remember ever putting them on the page. I mean, certainly I had to have written stories as a kid. I just don't remember doing it. And so I don't think I ever thought about it. And I don't think that it would have crossed my mind, the way that I grew up. I think it would have felt like too lofty of a dream, too big of a dream, something that only people who, in my young mind would have been, oh no, you have to be, super educated, or you have to live in New York, or you have to be, uber wealthy. And I just don't think it would have crossed my dream zone. I really don't. It would have felt too far away.
I think similarly, I've always been a storyteller. I've always actually been a writer, because writing was a way for me to interrogate my own feelings. And I always did that in either poetry form or story form. Like I never kept like a journal per se, or a diary or anything like that. It was always another character who was going through something similar that I was going through. And so I would interrogate, what decisions could be made or what choices could be made through writing those. And then I've written other books. Like before it was never about getting published. It was just that if I don't get this story out of me, I'm going to explode, right? And so I would have a story idea and it would just eat away at me for weeks and months. And I would sit down and, sometimes it's just a matter of writing a chapter and coming to a dead end, or writing a whole book where maybe nothing exactly happens, but getting the story idea out seemed to be like a pressure relief valve for me. It wasn't until like 5 or 6 years ago that I even thought about, publishing a book or trying to be published. Writing was just, you go shoot some hoops, you go, kick a ball around, you go write. Like it was a hobby that helped me get off energy, in this case, creative energy instead of physical energy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And actually, a couple people have asked this question. They want to know, for both of you, what is it like writing under Rick Riordan's label, under Rick Riordan Presents? What is that like as a writer, working with him, writing under his imprint?
How much time do we have?
However much you want.
It's, gosh, at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, which I'm totally overly dramatic, everyone who knows me knows that, but at the risk of sounding overly dramatic, I mean, it's just been such an incredible dream come true. Like Kwame, I think that these stories were inside, and it was a way for me to understand the world. When I first started writing, I didn't do it until I was an adult, and it was never, oh, I'm going to go get published, and I never even thought, oh, I'm going to go write a book. I just needed to get something out, and it was my way of understanding the world and my place in the world. And I think there's a healing process to writing as well. So, fast forward, I'm in the publishing game, and to have this opportunity to be chosen to, be part of this platform that Rick has shared has just been not only incredible from a writer's perspective, because Kwame and I share, as all the Rick Riordan Presents authors share, the same editor, Steph Lurie, who is so incredible and so patient, and is just the exact, she says all the right things to get the story to where it needs to be. And so getting to work with her and become a better writer because of it has been incredible. And I will tell you, I don't know that I would have taken some of the risks with my writing under a different publishing house where I was when I first wrote The Storm Runner. And I feel like there's this place of absolute acceptance and safety. And I feel like we're this family in RRP, that I was able to take these risks, and I didn't worry that, Rick or Steph are going to be like, what are you doing? And so I just feel like it has been such a nurturing place to be as a writer.
Yeah, I would say, I would echo all of that. I would say that I'm really happy that this is my first, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. That was my debut. That was my first book. I wrote other things before that, but going through the publishing process with this book was a really a learning experience. How there's a certain way that we write for the middle grade audience. It's different from young adult, it's different from adult, it's different from nonfiction, obviously, and I feel like that is the perfect avenue for me to tell these stories and to tell my stories. I don't know whether if it's because I have the humor of an 11-year-old, like that's my maturity level. But either way, listen, I'm openly honest. I laugh at a lot of the jokes that I write in my book. Like I snicker, and then my daughters are like, "What are you writing?" And I read it out loud to them, and they're like, "Oh my God." So, but working with Rick and Steph and everyone with the whole RRP team has been absolutely fantastic. Rick, for a long time, Rick was one of my favorite authors ever. I have a completely worn copy of The Lightning Thief, and I own, like several other copies. And then working with Steph, as JC said, it's as an editor, she's top notch, and it's a partnership, but it's also like there's a mentorship, a mentoring relationship where you're constantly getting better with each, book you write under Steph. So it's been a dream come true. Meeting the other authors, getting to read their books before my book, even came out. So getting to read The Storm Runner, getting to read Sal and Gabby, getting to read Arusha, like getting to read Dragon Pearl, like those were all incredible opportunities for me to kind of understand more and more of what I'm getting myself into and what I'm trying to present, being a part of this, this imprint. So it's been just one big family. And, we could sit here and talk about just RRP shenanigans forever. But that's not what that's not what you all came here for, clearly. That's not it at all.
So Nathaniel, I think, wants to build off of this, and he wants to know now, how do you get published and monetized? Is his question, coming from, I believe it's YouTube. Yep. How does one go about getting their works published and monetized?
That's for Kwame.
Well.
Lean in, Kwame.
The very first thing, and I get this, I don't know, JC, if you got this when you did school visits, but I would actually get this question a lot. And so my answer to that is always the very thing you have to do first is you have to have a book. You have to, or, a short story or a poem if you're a poet. You have to have, your manuscript. You can't plan anything until you have that. And when you have written your manuscript, sit down, read it, reread it, send it to someone else, a good friend. I used to send, when I was in high school, my mother, I was fortunate, my mother was a English professor. And so I would let her read some of my work or whatever. And so she was like my first editor. But you have to let other people read it, because the very first thing you write, the very first time you write it, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to get it and edit and edit and edit and edit. And then after that, you have to find someone who is going to be willing to take that book and shop it around. So they have to believe in your dream of the story almost as much as you do. And that person is called an agent. An agent is going to form a partnership with you and take your book to different publishing houses and say, hey, I believe this book is a winner. I believe it's great. I think the author is great. I think you're going to enjoy this story. And it can be hard. It can be hard to get an agent because you have to find someone who loves your story as much as you do. And sometimes for me, JC, I don't know how many rejections you've gotten before you got to where you were, but I, got tons of agent rejections. And when I finally got an agent, I got tons of submission rejections. And so I would say the very first thing you have to do is write a book and then edit your book. And then you have to be prepared to try and convince the world to love your book as much as you do. Then you can talk about money.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things. One, and when Kwame talks about rejection, I would say 99% of authors go through that. There's always the few that they just hit it big right out the gate, and everybody loved them, and they didn't have as many rejections. So I think making peace with that and realizing it's not personal, and it doesn't even mean that your story isn't good. Sometimes an agent has too much of that kind of book. Maybe they just have too many fantasy MG, middle grade authors. Or sometimes a publisher, they have too much coming out the next season or the season after that's so similar to your book that it's not going to work. And so making peace with yourself, not to take it personal. And, I always say that every single door that's a no, that closes in your face is just closer and closer and closer to the yes. So I think making peace with that. And the other thing that I would add is read widely. I am so surprised, Kwame, I don't know if this happens to you, but when I talk to people who want to get published and I say, well, what are you reading in children's literature? Well, I don't have time to read. And they don't know, the current titles. They're reading titles, and classics are great. I don't have any problem with that. I've got plenty of them. I reread them. But if you don't know what's going on in your own industry, if you don't have your finger on the pulse of what is being marketed, what is being publicized, what it has been successful. And I'm not saying to follow trends, you should never do that. But I think you have to be reading widely, not just, I don't just read fantasy, middle grade, and YA. I'm reading, I'm talking nonfiction, I'm talking, spy novels, I'm talking romance. Read widely across genres, I think is super, super important too.
Great. I want to go in a little bit of a different direction because I'm curious about something, given the world that we've been in the last 6 months. If you had to quarantine with one of your characters, who would it be and why?
Well, I would quarantine with Gum Baby. I want a doll. I want a Gum Baby. So if you could make that happen, Kwame, please just remember that I asked first, okay?
I got you.
I would actually quarantine with Apush, the god of death, darkness, and destruction. I would quarantine with him, and here's why. He has been appealing to me since the moment he stepped on the page. He was not meant to become who he became, and that was the beauty of watching his character develop in a natural way. And he has surprised me at every single turn. You never know what he's going to say. He's unpredictable. He's powerful. But you come to find out his loyalty is deep. And number one for me always is loyalty. And so, plus he's so cool. So I think I'd want to be with the God of Death.
That's a tough one for me. I would have to say, I would probably either quarantine with Anansi or Highjohn. And just because both seem like the type that they wouldn't let you get bored. Anansi is going to be full of tricks and full of, he's going to play his own little games. But life would be interesting. You wouldn't be bored. Highjohn is similar, Highjohn, and with his ability to step outside himself, step outside of time, and which I think we all should be able to do, and pull out for a wider perspective on the world. I feel like you would get into a lot of interesting things with Highjohn. But I think at the end of the day, I would probably choose Anansi, because Anansi, he would probably be able to tell a good story. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to pass the time. So you want to spend time with someone who's going to make life interesting and be able to tell you a good story.
Great. As we're talking, there are a bunch of questions coming in from the audience, and they kind of have a similar theme of, if you're a child and you've written something, but you're scared to share it with the world, what do you do? Or how do you get over all of those rejections? Did you ever feel like quitting? So what advice would you give to writers, future hopefully published authors, to help them continue on this process regardless of rejection or fear, or what would you say?
I think for me, I would say, in terms of dealing with the rejection, I know Kwame shares this with me. We're big Rocky fans. And I mean, when I tell you I've been obsessed with Rocky forever, I have been obsessed with, when I have a bad day, my husband always knows, because he comes home and I'm watching one of the Rocky movies. So I think finding something like that that inspires you, whether it's a book, a historical figure, a movie, music, a video game, going out and playing, something that inspires you to be greater than you are, than you think you can be. I really feel like holding that close is the thing that when you're feeling like the whole world is against you, that everyone is rejecting you, that you're not any good. You know, we have these voices that we just beat ourselves up constantly. I think especially artists. And I think finding that place for yourself that you can go to safely is really, really important. And the second thing that I would say is you don't have to share your work with the world. You don't owe your story to anyone. Find someone you trust. There's two, there's different kinds of readers. I mean, you can take your work to a family member, or your mom, your dad, a caregiver, and those people are going to say, oh, it's really great, we love it. And then there's going to be the more critical component. So maybe start with those who love you, who are going to be a little bit gentler with you, depending on what your goals are, and then find a critique partner, someone else who's also a writer. I think that there is some give and take there that makes it a more natural process.
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback off of your last comment, in that finding a critique partner is one of the greatest things that you can ever do as a writer, because a critique partner, it's not just someone who you just exchange, writing with, and you edit it or revise it, offer some suggestions and give it back. Like a critique partner, it's someone who almost, helps you build your story with you. Like they believe in your story. When you find the right person who you kind of vibe with, either you're both telling similar stories or you come from a similar place with similar themes, finding that critique partner is like, it's like finding, a lost sibling, right? Like someone that you can share your work with and who knows how to critique. And that's a valuable skill. Like, and when I say that, I mean, not just tell you that a sentence is bad, like, oh, this sentence sucks, why do you have this in here? But to tell you in a way that inspires you to change it and to better it, and do it in a way that comes from a place of care and value, and that they know that your writing is great, but they want you to be better. So, finding that critique partner, it can take some time, but it is a valuable and worthwhile endeavor. And for rejections suck, and they will always suck. I signed with an agent for a manuscript, and a year later got a rejection from a completely different agent, just because they had finally gotten around to it. And I have an agent. I have an agent now, but I still got a rejection for the book. And I'm like, ow, that hurts, You're always going to deal with rejections in life. Always. It's not just with writing, it comes with the entire, just being alive. You're going to deal with someone saying no to something, whether it's to career advancement or whether it's, can you have an extra cookie after dinner? You're always going to get rejected. And so learning how you best deal with rejection in a healthy way is also a worthwhile endeavor. As JC said, whether it's finding something to submerge yourself in, video games or music, taking a walk. For me, sometimes when I get a rejection about my writing, I turn to my first love, which is reading. Reading other people's writing has always been an inspiration for me, and it always helps me pull myself out of whatever pit of despair I've dropped into, because I know that they've gone through what I've gone through. They've worked through rejections. They've worked through multiple edits and revision rounds and finding agents and getting that book sold. And so they've been through what I am going through. And so reading a great book by a great author is always something that helps me cope with rejections.
Great. So as we're winding down, I feel like I always need to ask this question. In terms of like inspiration, who would you recommend, or what books should your readers and these viewers read for inspiration of their own to become writers? Like, who are you reading right now or in the past? I know, we talked about Rick Riordan being an inspiration, and Rocky as a movie being helpful. So even like movies or TV shows, like what is the creative inspiration that you would recommend to the viewers?
I'm going to go a little bit off script here.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I'm going to excuse myself is by saying that, I'm going to start off with the idea of an oral historian, someone who collects stories and then transcribes them and writes them down for the world to read. People like Zora Neale Hurston and Henry Louis Gates are two of my favorite ones that I constantly am going back to. But I'm going to say that doing what they did is also a great way to get creative inspiration. And that is going around your community and talking to people, especially your elders, about, different anything, what life was like for them growing up, or some of their fun stories. Some of the best stories I've heard didn't come from writers, or didn't come from authors. It came from someone who's like, let me tell you, what happened to me this one time I was waiting on the bus. And you're like, oh, okay, here comes Uncle Joseph. He's got another tale for us. He's never written a story a day in his life, but he knows how to tell a story. And when you know how to tell a story, that's the key to writing, is knowing how to tell a story.
I love that you just said that. I feel like we don't give enough weight to the oral tradition and how important that is.
Oh, and the stories are always so great. I mean, I have people in my family, they tell me stories and I think, how in the heck did that actually happen? Mm-hmm. It's been embellished, but they're quite comical, and sometimes they make it into my books. So I think what Kwame said is so valuable. And I also think for me, I think it's important. I know what inspires me. You as an individual have to find that thing that inspires you, right? So whether it is, I know looking at the sunsets in New Mexico against the mountains, or the sunrise against the mountains and the sunsets across the mesa, it makes me realize how small I am. We all are. And there is something about that that's inspirational for me that I feel like I was born with a sense of urgency. I don't know why I was that way as a kid. And I think that has always propelled me forward. So finding the thing that inspires you is really important. And so for me, I always find inspiration in poetry, always. To me, it is the highest form of art. I get in arguments with people about this because some people think it's music, some people think it's visual art. To me, the poets they are the magicians of our time. I don't know how they do what they do. And so some of my favorites, I love Pablo Neruda. I will often turn to Pablo Neruda, love Rilke, and I love Mary Oliver. I think she's one of the greatest poets that we've seen. And because she's such a philosopher. And there's so many that I could name. But for me, sitting down with poetry always inspires me, not just to be a better writer, but to actually be a better person.
And if I could jump off of that real quick, JC, if you, like me, out there struggle with, okay, I want to get into more poetry, where do I turn to? If you have an email, I signed up for a poem a day. It just gets emailed right to my inbox. And sometimes it's people I know. It might be Jacqueline Woodson. It might be Jason Reynolds. It might be Elizabeth Acevedo. Sometimes it's someone I've never heard of. And what's fun is just, it's right there. It's 3 to 5 minutes of reading that poem and just sitting and digesting with it. And then I'm on and about my day. It's not me, trying to, either order books or filter through the poetry section in the library. It's, you get a poem right there in your inbox.
Yeah.
I love it. Great suggestions. Thank you both so much. This has been so much fun. I have learned so much, and I feel like I'm going to just need to keep kicking my children out, locking them out of the house for the day and telling them to go on adventures. So maybe one day they'll grow up to be writers like the two of you. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone who's watching today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.